So let's talk a little bit about effects inside of After Effects. I mean, it is inherent in the name. It's called After Effects. Sooner or later, we get around to talking about effects. So if you've used Photoshop, you're fairly familiar with filters, and effects kind of take the place of filters in After Effects. The nice thing about After Effects is when we start stacking up effects, which we'll talk about stacking a little bit later, when we start stacking up effects, it's actually non-destructive, which is good, because a lot of times in Photoshop, for example, if you're using destructive methods, well, you end up altering your raster layers, which you can get yourself in trouble if you're not careful. So there are, nowadays there are non-destructive workflows in Photoshop, but After Effects has always had non-destructive workflows, which is good. And by non-destructive, I mean you're not going to mess up the base file here. You're not going to mess up your work by applying effects to it. So we are familiar, at least from the last lesson I talked about, with our plane here already, and he's still coming in for a landing, and that's good, and everybody's glad. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple effects. I can't go through every single one of these effects. We'll talk about some things like color correction later, and that'll warrant the use of some effects. But for the time being, I'm just going to cover just some, run-of-the-mill effects that you may or may not use. And it's really up to you to explore and to find different things and different uses for effects. And really, it's the kind of thing where over time and through reading and through looking for different applications for things, you're really going to learn the effects library fairly well. Another thing to consider too is that you can buy effects, third-party effects, to put into your effects box. So Trapcode, for example, I've got a couple of Trapcode plugins here. Trapcode makes some really popular plugins. So they have something called Particular, they have something called Shine. So you can go out, and Red Giant is another person who makes another company that makes a lot of really popular plugins. So third-party vendors make a lot of effects and plugins, and they make good business on that. So let's take a look now about how to pull down effects, and we're going to talk about how to keyframe aspects of effects. So just think about this. We've got, for example, our position aspect, or our position attribute of our plane. Well, we're able to keyframe that. We're able to make it change over time. Consider that effects can also be keyframed over time. So all the attributes that we're keyframing now that belong to the object, well, we can go ahead and add an effect, and we can keyframe the attributes of that effect. So we're going to look at that here right now. So when adding effects, the first thing we should really do is make sure that we have the effects and presets box, the effects and presets panel available. So if you don't see it, you can pull it down here from Window, like we've talked about before. Any panel you don't see that you need, you can always pull it down from the Window menu. I think this is standard issue, and it typically will show up by default, but if you're not seeing it, go to Window and pull down Effects and Presets, and you'll get this handy window here. I never really scroll down through these unless I'm really bored and I'm searching for something to do. Chances are, I'd say 9 times out of 10, you're actually going to go through here and you're going to type in something that you're looking for. You're going to get pretty slick and learn the names of some of these effects that you're going to be looking for. So let's talk a little bit about, so let's go ahead and start searching for some pretty common effects that people use in After Effects. I'll cover a couple of them, but there's way more than what I talk about here today, and you'll need to go out and explore on your own a little bit better. So what we're going to do is, a pretty common effect is blur. So we use it a lot now. Well, we'll use it a lot in Photoshop and even in Illustrator to a certain extent. And if I type in blur, I'll see that I get all different kinds of blur. So you can explore these on your own. There's radial blur. There's something called smart blur. That's pretty useful. There's also something I can go for just the regular classic Gaussian blur. So I can select that from here. There's a couple different ways for me to get it applied to my particular layer. And really, we take these effects and we apply them to different layers, right? If we drag this in here, I can take it and drag it in and apply it, right? And so it's applied that effect to that layer, right? We can delete layers from our stack here out of our effects control. If you don't see effects control, it's typically right here. It's another one of these standard issue panels that you should be seeing. And very easily I can take this and I can delete it, if I don't want it anymore, I can try it out. If I don't like it, I can kick it. The thing that I usually like to do is I'll select this, and then if I double click the effect from here, like so, it'll pop up on the layer. And that's typically, the best way, the preferred method for me is just to double click these in. And you'll see here that it shows up here in the effects control, and you can then tweak the value of it, which, as you can see, if I tweak it, I start applying more blurriness to my object, right? So, and it's persistent through the animation. So now we've applied it, but the nice part about these is that you can stack them up and start tweaking them, and you'll notice that you get different. You can get different effects by stacking them in different orders. Something we'll talk about a little bit later. I can reset the effect to its original, default settings. Something else too is I can also, now that I've added it to the stack, I can see it now underneath of this layer, and I can go in and I can actually keyframe the aspects of this effect. So say, for example, when the plane comes in, I want it to be completely sharp, but maybe on this approach here, he's really blurry, right? I don't know why, but you can see here, just by setting those two keyframes, just like I'm used to setting keyframes for my other attributes, I've managed to keyframe an effect. So you can get a lot of mileage out of keyframing effects, and it's a fairly standard practice that we use in order to make things have different in order to apply different levels of expression to things. So that's something to consider, and really a quick workflow tip to get your workflow working a little bit quicker, a little bit more quickly. From here, the nice thing is that if there's a particular aspect of this or a particular attribute that I want to tweak, if I right click up here and I say reveal in timeline, it's very nice because it'll automatically pull just that one thing down that I need, right? So I can right click on this, I can reveal it in the timeline, and it automatically pulls it up down here so that I can get to work and I don't have to waste a lot of time digging through and twirling down menus to find the thing that I'm looking for. So again, I can go in and I can get it done pretty quickly. So that's how you are able to keyframe effects. So now that the concept of keyframing an effect, not that hard, right? And of course, you've got all of your usual suspect tools available, right? So we could take this and we can, obviously we can apply our easing to it. These are keyframes just like anything else. So there we go. I've just easy eased the blur in for what it's worth, if you're interested in that, right? So there we go. Anyhow, just to show you that works. So Gaussian blur, maybe I don't want it right now. Some other effects, we do a lot of things with color. Obviously, and that's a different section that we'll talk about in terms of how to use this for color correction of clips and the like. I mean, it's a really powerful color correction tool. But there's other things that we work with also. There's something very popular called fractal noise. So not to be confused with the fractal, but fractal noise is very interesting because we can take this and we can apply it to a layer, and it actually applies this cloud-like pattern inside. And right now it's not moving, but the interesting part about fractal noise is that you can make it move in different patterns. So if I keyframe the evolution of the fractal noise and watch as I move it, you can see that you get this cloud-like effect on it, right? Well, I can go ahead and keyframe that, right? And we all know from before that if I right click on that and I reveal it in the timeline, well, something I can do is I can find this evolution and I can start keyframing it, right? So later on it helps to add an expression to this. So when we talk about expressions, I'll probably use fractal noise as a good example of how to use expressions. So as this comes in, the noise is evolving and we can really push it really far so that we get a lot of, it almost looks like it's going through the clouds as it comes in, right? So we've got this interesting effect going on with fractal noise. There's different kinds of fractal noise. So you can do rocky fractal noise. Something that's really popular is block fractal noise. You see that a lot showing up in a couple places. This is a really nice, easy. We can ease off the complexity of it, so it looks more like a mosaic program. Like it's done like it's mosaic, right? So there's interesting things that you can do with this, and it's a really quick and easy way to add a little bit of complexity to backgrounds and other aspects like that. So this is what we would call like a generative effect or a generate effect. So it's something that actually will put a graphic or an effect on something that you're doing. So we're going to go ahead and delete that and move on to a couple more effects. So let's go ahead and talk about a couple more effects that are notable. You already get the aspect of keyframing, and you understand pretty well that you can keyframe any, most aspects of any of these effects. Something that we use a lot of too is glow. So there's different kinds of plugins that let you do glow. Some of them are paid, some of them are not. Glow, can be fairly popular to do so. If I pull that down, well, we don't really see an effect right now, but if I ease off of, if I drop the threshold on the glow a little bit, you'll notice that you get this obviously glowing effect on whatever it is that you put it on. So this is a fairly, this is a nice effect to add on to something. It adds a little bit of that, a little bit of a halo to something. I use it quite a bit. It can look a little dated, like Secret of Nim, like if you use it too much. Harkens back to the days when they used to cut transparent holes in film and then backlight them to get those effects that were so popular back in the 1980s. So yeah, you get that aspect of it. You can always go here and, by the way, and click on this FX icon here to turn an effect on and off, right? So you can go ahead and do that. Another way that I also like to get that glowing effect is I use something called CC Composite. So there's effects in here that have they carry the CC prefix. That stands for Cycore, which is it's a separate company that's managed to package their effects in with After Effects. This is a fairly powerful effect. It lets you automatically take a copy of this and put it on top of it right inside of that without having to actually make a new layer and put it on top and stuff like that. So you notice you can get a similar effect to your glow just by using composite add. You can composite multiply to make it darker. We'll talk about blend modes a little bit later, but those are some of the things you can do with it. You can actually change the opacity of the layers. So this is actually like a nice little way to make things light up as well without that extra halo effect that you get, that really glowy halo effect that you can get from glow, etc. So there's a couple of different things. There's also some transform effects. You can invert something, so you can change the channel, you can invert the colors, all different kinds of things. If it's something you're familiar with using in Photoshop, then you can usually pull it down from here. Most of the Photoshop effects are there. So before we close here, applying effects to vector graphics can be a little bit limiting at times. So I'm going to pull a video in here real quickly and show you some of these more advanced color effects on video so you get a better idea. I'll go ahead and I'll start a new composition. I've got a video here of a 3D printer, and you've noticed that there's some of these effects are really color specific. There's some ones that are pretty fun to deal with. Something called Colorama, which takes an input phase and an output phase, right? So you can take the intensity and apply sort of this rainbow color pattern to it. It's got lots of cool presets, you can do all kinds of different things with it. So, all different kinds of trippy color effects. And really, you can strategically stack Colorama on a lot of different things to pull out different aspects of color. So it's not just for goofing off. It's not just about, getting psychedelic looking effects out of things. Believe it or not, some of these things have some really, really good applications to them. And you can go ahead and you can apply an alpha ramp to something. You can do different things that are actually very strategic and actually work pretty well to draw particular colors out of things. So that's one aspect of it. And also something that I wanted to point out is corner pinning. It's a distort effect. And corner pinning is it's less in effect. It's less in use these days than it used to be. It used to be really, really important to use corner pinning for tracking things and pinning things to other stuff, within 3D space. Now you've got the 3D camera tracker. We use it a lot less, but just for the sake of kind of showing you how it works, this is essentially what corner pinning is. It's kind of ways to give to give a piece a little bit more perspective. So I can grab onto these handles and I can go ahead and I can make it look like, for example, that it's on a billboard somewhere, or something of that sort, and which is really what we used to use it for. We used to use pretty advanced tracking tools like Mocha to track these 4 points along a screen, and you could put this on like a computer screen with the cameras rotating around and stuff like that. We do all that stuff a lot more differently now for visual effects and special effects, but nonetheless, that's essentially how you can still do that with corner pin. So corner pin, every once in a while you may find yourself needing to use it. So that's another effect that you may or may not want to use. And again, to remind you, you can actually keyframe these, right? So I can add a keyframe there, and then I can, maybe move it a little bit, over the left. And you can see as I scrub it, it's like any other effect, you can keyframe it. So hopefully that gives you an overview of some of the effects. I'll try to cover a couple more when I talk about effect stacking too.